So I was scrolling through YouTube, looking for YouTube recommendations, and then I started researching for a future video that I've been working on, and I came across this video, why 99% of movies today are garbage. So whether or not you know who Chris Gore is, you might have heard of the YouTube channel Film Threat, of which he's a part of. Film Threat champions independent films while mocking Hollywood. Watch the Film Threat livecast for reviews, interviews, conversations about movies. When I came across this video, now again, I'm not saying I'm a huge fan of everything Film Threat does, but I think his analysis here on why 99% of movies today are garbage is right on, especially when we get talking about Star Wars.
Would you say that 99% of all movies today are garbage?
In an age where most movies are referred to as content, I would say that 99% of most movies are pretty bad. I always try to, like, when I say 99%, I mean of mainstream. It really is, when you look at, and especially I think one of the best examples of this is the sort of Zack Snyder's Justice League and how that was, bungled. How that was bungled, how the Star Wars franchise was bungled.
Yes. Because why? Why was the Star Wars franchise messed up? What was the problem underlying all of it? I mean, there's so many different issues that we can talk about from the sequel trilogy. Even if you enjoyed them, you have to admit there were major issues with those films.
For those who hate it, I could not respect your opinion more. And for those who love it, I question your sanity.
So what did they mess up? What did they mess up? I think he's got some good insight here.
How they could not, I mean, to me, I'm the studio executive in charge of Star Wars, and we're making a new Star Wars movie, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put Han, Luke, and Leia in a scene together. And the fact that that moment, we will never be able to have that moment in cinema when Carrie Fisher was alive, that to me is, I mean, that's malpractice. That's studio malpractice. The fact that they had what Zack Snyder's vision, what he was building up to be, and I think seeing the 4-hour final product of what Zack Snyder's Justice League turned out to be, and that they made this garbage thing, Joss Whedon, I mean, it's disheartening to me to see.
So malpractice, that's an interesting term to use. Now, I will agree to an extent that not having Luke, Han, and Leia there together on screen at some point in that trilogy is a major foresight, a major miss because of what you're trying to do. Like, let's be honest for a moment. We all knew that Luke, Han, and Leia cannot be Luke, Han, and Leia forever. Everyone knows that. No one, but I will say for myself, I would not have been upset if those movies, those sequel trilogies, were actually passing the torch on to a new generation that was going to continue Star Wars on. But that isn't what we got. We didn't get a satisfying end to that saga while passing things off to leave it open-ended going forward. No, instead we got a mess of a 3-movie trilogy that just crapped all over the character of Luke, that threw into the mix a Mary Sue lead actress who I think Daisy Ridley did a fantastic job acting with what she got. But I mean, come on. It's the very definition of a Mary Sue character. You had some great ideas of characters, like a stormtrooper, a former stormtrooper, right? Like, I thought the idea of Finn's character was great, but then executed absolutely terribly. Now, I'm not saying that if you had had one scene with Luke, Han, and Leia, then all of a sudden everything works. But it just shows how little heart, how little passion, how disconnected from the actual fan base these writers and directors and everyone else truly was.
I will say on an indie level, I tend to take like a glass half full view, and I tend to always look for the positive when it comes to indie films, because you cannot compare you can't compare an indie movie shot in 12 days for $10,000 to Justice League whichever version you're talking about, you can't compare, because in my mind, there is no excuse for a studio to fail when they put out a blockbuster movie.
More fail than not, right? When was the last time you can think of a movie that you went and genuinely enjoyed in the theaters? That a big budget blockbuster movie that you really enjoyed. For me, it was Dune. That's really been it. And I did really enjoy that. But other than that, I almost don't want to go anymore because it's not worth the money. Because so many of these bigger films just are copycat, same thing again, lather, rinse, repeat, do it again. And I'm tired of it. It's just not interesting. And I think that's exactly what's happening in Star Wars. Same thing.
You have no excuse. Your job is to entertain me, not lecture me, not lecture me. Your job is to entertain me.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
Unfortunately, we live in a time, back in the day when Star Wars was first made, I feel like they were checking one box, and it was called fun. And now there's a million boxes that must be checked.
I'll push back on that a little bit. I think there were some other boxes that wanted to be checked, particularly by George Lucas. And obviously fun, I think, was an important part of it. And I think the creativity that they were creating with that original trilogy and the people that were there is a big part of that. But I think there were some definite desires by George to get across, and it wasn't just fun. So I don't know that I buy that completely.
There are all sorts of noting and committees and this thing, and this is where you end up with, that last Star Wars movie by J.J. Abrams is unwatchable. I mean,
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Hello, the Jedi. Rise of Skywalker.
I mean, it's garbage. It's
Truth.
It's
Yep.
exactly. It informs exactly everything wrong with the studio system. It's terrible. So I look at
There's so many threads and plot lines in that movie that are just dumb. Now, of course, people are going to say, well, J.J. Abrams was doing the best with what he was given from Rian Johnson. Don't give me that. It was all set up poorly from Force Awakens. This is all on Abrams and Johnson together, not one over the other. And don't get me wrong, I think Last Jedi was terrible and Rise of Skywalker was unwatchable. The only of the three that's even I would even go back to even maybe enjoy slightly would be Force Awakens, but I know where everything goes, so now that one's ruined also. But the way that JJ set everything up with this open box kind of mindset that, it could be anything, there could be so many different directions to take this, that's not good writing. Just creating mystery for the sake of creating mystery is not good writing, but that's what the Disney Corporation wanted. They wanted J.J. Abrams to make it all this kind of, it could be anything. Yeah, they never thought that it'd be terrible would be the thing that it would turn out to be.
The Justice League debacle, the Star Wars franchise, and how that was mishandled. And I look at that and I just think, how could that have been done? Where was they're ever looking at the fans and what they think? What do the fans think of this stuff? Are they satisfying the fans? Most normal people don't care. Is it entertaining? I'm taking my family, especially how expensive it is to the movie theater experience, which is going away, right? The theatrical experience of seeing a movie is going away. You had better entertain me.
And I think I would say for a lot of average, normal, just casual Star Wars folks, the movies were entertaining. I think for a lot of folks, they were visually stunning. The music was quite good, oftentimes. Even some of the fight scenes and some of the things that were given, I thought were good, even though we've seen better. So I don't know. I think for many, it was entertaining, maybe much like the prequels, where I think a lot of people saw those films and were entertained, and there was still a group of fans who didn't like it. Though with the sequel trilogy, it's a different level. It really divided the fan base because this was so clearly mishandled.
And I think that whether Hollywood notices it or not, I think that people don't really like politics woven into fairly mainstream, which should be mainstream entertainment experiences. And I think we're seeing that more and more. It's unbelievable to me. I think you're leaving money on the table for not giving what the customer is looking for in that experience. But
now again, I think I'm going to push back a little bit here, because to say that Star Wars is apolitical, it has no political messages, it's not in any way speaking to the greater understanding that we might have as humanity, to our struggle in this world. And you go to that original trilogy and you go closer, there's a lot of messages there.
American politics has always been behind these films. People have read in from the very beginning. They read in the relationship between the US and the Soviet Union, Watergate. Now, in this episode, without quite being Michael Moore, it is very political. There are references to have we become what we feared. There are references to the State of the Republic. How intentional was that for you?
Well, the political backstory was written 30 years ago. It was written during the Vietnam War and in the Richard Nixon era. I didn't want to do a movie about how people take over democracy. I wanted to figure out how democracies give themselves over to tyrants.
That really kind of pushed back into this anti-war mentality, even though it's called Star Wars, that we see the way the Empire is portrayed, the way the rebels are portrayed, the way the Jedi are a part of that, this kind of anti-establishment, anti-oppressor kind of mindset. Now, maybe not, that wouldn't have been the language. We've different language and different skins that this gets put on today. And I think we have a very hyper divided culture. I mean, this was a video from 3 years ago, and I think we're just becoming more and more divided, and we're seeing more and more ways where filmmakers and studios are putting their politics and their values into film. The difference, I think, is it's just pretty hyper liberal. It's not very like middle of the road. And I think as a culture, we've swung more to the extremes, where I think there were many that were in the middle that may not have loved or really been there for the political nature of some of these films, but they could stomach it. But now we've been pushed so far to the extremes where we can't even have conversations with people we disagree with, where we can't even sit down at a dinner table with someone of a different political party. And I think that's a problem. And I think that problem is showing up because it's the culture we live in. I think that problem is showing up in the film industry. Because I don't think you can ever make a film completely outside of the culture you live in currently. So that there's almost like an admission that there's going to be some level. But I also would agree that I think the level that it's gotten to is getting out of hand, to the point where it's overriding the storyline, the casting, the writing, the directing of these films.
People have told me that it's the gayest Star Wars, and I frankly...
You're offended?
Into it. No.
I think that Star Wars is so gay already.
Okay.
I mean, have you seen the fits? We'd be like, look how gay this is, and then send each other a reference photo.
And are you telling me, with a straight face, that C-3PO is straight?
They're a couple. That's what I think.
And that's where I think the shift has happened, where things have gone from it being in service to the story, the way that Star Wars was, because even though there's political undertones and things being communicated, it's all in service to this greater, bigger story. But now today, there for sure are tons of checkboxes that a studio wants to see, that a company wants to see, and particularly one like Disney has not been shy about saying they want to see in their films and TV shows. But let's not pretend that politics just all of a sudden showed up. I think that that's a little naive. We can have more nuance than that. But I do understand what he's saying, that it pushes these films and pushes people away from many of these films. And that's a fair point that I would agree with.
So in my mind, studios, there's no excuse to fail. You have the best people in marketing. You have the most talented actors. craftsman when it comes to special effects and cinematography, music. There's no excuse for that to fail. And I think part of the failing of Hollywood is that the marketing is so good sometimes. I've argued with friends sometimes that I believe that there should be a key art. I mean, there are key art awards, for key movie poster art. I'm a fan of movie poster art. There's a really good documentary about movie poster art called 24 by 36. Check out that documentary. But there should almost be a marketing award. And here's the problem, the conundrum. The marketing for these movies is so good, the product doesn't live up to the marketing.
That's an interesting point. The marketing is so good that the product doesn't live up to the marketing. To an extent, I would agree. I think when we saw trailers, just stay in the Star Wars universe, when we saw trailers for Force Awakens and The Last Jedi and even Rise of Skywalker, I think these trailers and marketing have gotten so good, and they know what to pull on, what strings to pull to get an audience interested. But it's really all manipulation because it almost has nothing to do with the actual story. I mean, and if you're being honest, all marketing is manipulation at some level, right? I'm trying to get you to click on a video, and I'm trying to do that without being clickbaity, but I want you to be wondering, like, well, what is that about? And that's all commercials, all ads. Somehow we're trying to sell you on something that you're going to buy in on. And we all know, like a Coors Light commercial, we all know a train is not going to smash through something and bring a bunch of cold air, right? We know this, but they're selling you on an idea. But of course, the idea doesn't live up to the product. So I think this has always been the case in advertising and marketing, but I think it even is just heightened more when it's a franchise like Star Wars that we love, that we desire and want to see do well, and then we get excited about it, and then it goes away. It'd be like, it's the difference between like telling my kids when we're on the way home from somewhere, like, hey, we're going to go get ice cream, and then we don't go get ice cream. They're going to be like out of their minds, frustrated, annoyed, and mad. Why? Because I dangled ice cream out there as an idea and then took it away. They're way more upset than if I had just never mentioned it and surprised them by going off and getting ice cream or not. We drive home, we go upstairs, time for bed, whatever. No upset kids because they didn't know ice cream was even on the table. So we get these trailers that tease us with this ice cream, and then we go and we are excited to have ice cream, and all we get is a steaming pile of crap. We're not happy because you told us it was ice cream.
The reason there's so many bad films these days is I think, well, one, the barrier to entry is much easier, but I also think that that's on an indie level. I see bad indie films too, right? I usually want to help them and say, this was your lesson. Okay, you'll make a better movie in your second movie if you don't quit. But when it comes to studio films, there's just too many notes. There are too many people that it's sort of the modern day ball player, right? Like it's just like, it's not about the passion for playing the game. Not about a passion of, hitting the ball and hearing the roar of the crowd. It's the licensing deals and it's this and the sales of that and the TV commercials and whatnot. When I look back at the movie The Player, which came out when I first moved to Los Angeles, Robert Altman's The Player, things haven't changed. The subject has changed. I mean, that was it was erotic thrillers and, it was Julia Roberts and Bruce Willis were being cast in every movie that was pitched in that film. Now it's superhero movies, but it's really too many cooks. And I feel like the people being, elevated to these positions are good executives, but they're not people that know the material, the heart of the material. And when you look at the history of, creatives who really created something like a George Lucas or a Gene Roddenberry, things begin to lose their way when they get sidelined, right? You really need those. I feel like the modern day Hollywood now, and especially with streaming changing the game, theaters, the survival of theaters being in doubt, really, we may live at a time where maybe the billion-dollar blockbuster may not be back for a long time. And that may end up being a good thing, right? Like, let's make, I'll joke with a friend and I'll say my favorite Spider-Man movie is the one where Mary Jane is in peril at the end, which is pretty much all the Spider-Man movies. Or my favorite science fiction movie is the movie where that thing blows up at the end. That's every science fiction movie, right? Which is why, and The Empire Strikes Back was because it wasn't about we got to do and blow up the thing. It's boring. It's just creatively bankrupt. which is why Empire Strikes Back holds up. Everybody says, oh, it's the best Star Wars movie. I mean, you could argue, but it's because it didn't do that thing that happened in all the other movies. And so trying to go against doing that thing, or fighting a blue light. There's a lot of fighting a blue light that happens in films. Fighting a blue light, saving the person at the end, the thing that blows up at the end. And I say defy those cliches at all costs. And it's funny because you see, there's still people that are able to work within studio system and deliver worthwhile films. Christopher Nolan being among them. I've quite admired his work, although he has a tendency to make things a little overly complex for no reason, just to brag about how smart he is. But there's always a point in his films, and you'll notice it once I point it out, where a character in a Christopher Nolan movie will say, we have to go down the thing and grab the thing to do this and shoot this. It's captain narrative, right? It's the person that stops the movie to tell you what's happening in the movie, to explain what's going to happen so that the audience, the dumb audience, understands. And to me, oh, so you got that studio note, and he compromises in a way that doesn't completely destroy what he's trying to achieve as a filmmaker, so he's willing to play ball.
And we've seen exactly this, the notes being the issue. This is why Stephen Knight has been rumored to be out and no longer being the writer for the Rey movie, and that movie might even be on hold or canceled. We don't actually even know. Here's the challenging part then. What do we do? Where do we go from here? Because clearly it's not like we can say, oh, we can't just be anti-studio. That's how these things are going to be made, particularly for Star Wars. So how does the studio get back to the heart and the passion and the creativity that made these films and universes and whatever the best they were? Or is it over? Is it just over? I also actually think there's something he's not talking about that is a part of the reason for these pretty terrible movies being made now. And I think it all traces back to 2012, the beginning of the Avengers and the MCU and the marvelization of Star Wars. If you want to see that video, you can click right here. Guys, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. If you'd be willing to leave a like on the way out, I would thank you very much for that. And I'll see you over there on that video. Thanks again.